Today on the 21st Show, a historic day in America as, for the first time, a president has been convicted of a crime. A jury of former President Trump's peers found him guilty on 34 counts of falsifying business records in furtherance of his 2016 presidential election. We want to hear from you at 800-222-9455. What do you think of the verdict? Does this change how you'll vote in November? And do you think it'll change how other people vote? What does this say about the American legal system? We're talking about that with you, political commentator Jonathan Alter, Chicago Sun-Times D.C. Bureau Chief Lynn Sweet, and two experts in political science and the law from here in Illinois. I'm Brian Mackey. That's all coming up today on The 21st Show, which is a production of Illinois Public Media. But first, the news. From Illinois Public Media, this is The 21st Show. I'm Brian Mackey. It's been 235 years since George Washington took the oath of office as President of the United States. Since that time, none of the men who held that job have been convicted of a crime until yesterday. As you know by now, a jury of former President Donald Trump's peers found him guilty on all 34 charges of falsifying business records in furtherance of a scheme to help him get elected in 2016. This comes as he remains the presumptive presidential nominee of the Republican Party. Reaction was swift, and in a departure from previous instances of criminality among current and former office holders, it largely fell along party lines. Justice has been served, said Democratic Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. After facing a jury of his peers, Donald Trump is exposed as the liar and the fraud that he is, Pritzker said. But Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson issued a statement calling it, quote, a shameful day in American history. He said this was a purely political exercise, not a legal one. I know that you have feelings on this as well.
Hi, my name is Kay, and I'm calling from Champaign. I couldn't help but think about all the times that Mr. Trump led chants of lock her up when he ran against Hillary Clinton. And there's some of us out here that would just grin if somebody started chanting, lock him up.
Kay's voicemail sums up the majority of the comments we receive, but there were dissenters like Sarah in Rockford who said, I think it's an absolute joke. While slimy, paying for an NDA is not illegal, and the jury being given a convoluted 50-page directory of how to proceed was astounding, but not nearly as much as the judge saying they didn't have to come to a unanimous vote. How is that a fair jury of peers? We'll get more into some of those aspects of this case. This is the time to make your voice heard at 800-222-9455. Was justice done? Will this affect your vote, or do you think it'll affect anyone else's vote? And what does this say about the American justice system? 800-222-9455 is the number to join us today. 800-222-9455. Joining me now to talk more about what happened are two of our foremost political observers. Jonathan Alter is a Chicago native, an MSNBC analyst, and the author of multiple books on American presidents. Jonathan, welcome back to the 21st Show. Thanks for making the time.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Also with us is Lynn Sweet, the Washington bureau chief for the Chicago Sun-Times. Lynn, welcome to you as well. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks so much for asking me to be on the show, and hello, Jonathan.
Hi, Lynn.
All right.
Great to be with you.
Jonathan, I want to start with you. Top line reaction to yesterday's verdict.
Well, I spent all 23 days in the courtroom. I didn't miss a single second of the trial. And from my observation, I saw all the evidence. This was fully justified. And justice was served. And I don't mean to be critical of one of your callers, but I'm going to be, because this is what I realized this morning when I got up. I actually am not interested in hearing anybody's analysis of this case in terms of whether there was enough evidence to convict, who has not either been in the courtroom like me or read the thousands of pages of transcripts. So if that caller read all the transcripts, and I understand why she could not get into the trial like I could with a press pass. If she read all the transcripts, then I'd welcome a conversation with her. But for her to say that there wasn't enough evidence to convict and that somehow the jury instructions that didn't require unanimity on all the elements here were somehow something the judge made up when actually they were standard instructions from New York State. If people want to actually get into a conversation about the evidence here in the law, I'd love to do that. If people want to just get on a soapbox and say, I love Trump and this was all made up and it was a, preposterous prosecution and repeat a lot of Republican talking points, I'm sorry to sound prickly, but I don't think they have standing or the basis to do that because they haven't made a good faith examination of the evidence.
Yeah, anyone who has ever covered a trial as a reporter knows that what the public understands about it and what you actually see from sitting there every minute of a case are two very different things. Lynn, let me bring you into the conversation. Top line reaction, either your own or how you're seeing people react to this, which is an interesting aspect of it.
Well, I just listened to Trump's remarks at Trump Tower. It lasted about 40 minutes. So let me just tell you what in my mind was first. That the potential of Trump spreading misinformation is magnified and more dangerous than ever based on what he said. And let's start out with one point. As he went on with repeating his list of grievances, including how he somehow wasn't able to testify, which is not true, he also said, when he's talking about migrants and the threat to the country, that people come in with languages that we never heard of. Wow. Let's just absorb that a minute. That a man who has been a president, wants to be again, has some problem because people speak languages which I think he means he has never heard of. How can that not raise flares to people? And I speak to you with the Champaign station going out to people in parts of Illinois where there is heavy support for Trump. I understand it. And I want to amplify Jonathan's point, and this is my plea. Use common sense. Read a record. If you know how courts work and the routine of a criminal trial, then you'll see that not much out of the ordinary happened. And you're talking to a man who is complaining because people speak languages we never heard of. That's kind of my first takeaway here.
Jonathan, we've seen the response. You mentioned you were in there for all of this trial. We saw Illinois Congresswoman Mary Miller from Central Illinois posted on social media, I sat in this trial for a day and it was a complete sham, she said. That seems to be the main talking point we've heard. Southern Illinois Congressman Mike Bost used similar language. New York 6 weeks sham trial against President Trump has eroded the public's trust. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, they're just sycophants. I saw Congresswoman Miller in the courtroom. I think actually she was there a half a day, but perhaps she stayed longer. It was a 23-day trial, and she wants us to believe. By the way, the Trump guests in the trial were allowed to use their cell phones. Reporters were not. We had laptops so we could take notes, but cell phone usage is normally prohibited in the courtroom. But, I think it's understandable that for guests of the defendants, they can use their cell phones. A couple of days I was in the row right behind the guests, and I was not behind Mary Miller, but I was on another day directly behind Vivek Ramaswamy and other guests and other members of Congress, and all of them were on their phones for the duration of their time in the courtroom. So for Congresswoman Miller to conclude it was a sham based on one day out of 23 is really irresponsible, and also, and then the other thing that they're saying is, well, it was a Democratic prosecutor. So are they saying that only a Republican prosecutor can prosecute Republicans, and I guess only a Democratic prosecutor can prosecute Democrats? Is that what they're saying? DAs are elected in our country. They all belong to political parties. So, of course, at the inception, there's, some sort of political dimension to this since it's an elected office. But, you bring cases where you have evidence, and this was one of them. There was nothing shambolic about this at all. Now, if the evidence had indicated something different, I might have thought, there's reasonable doubt. So just to give you an example, it turned out that in the year 2017, when Donald Trump was writing Michael Cohen $35,000 a month checks, which they fraudulently pretended were for legal services rendered when they were actually a reimbursement for the hush money that Cohen paid out of his own pocket or from a revolving line of credit to Stormy Daniels, right? And then it was grossed up, which was the smoking gun in the case, because it was in the handwriting of Alan Weisselberg, the chief financial officer of the Trump organization. So it was the whole crime was like on one page of handwritten notes. But in that year, just bear with me for a second, because I do think it's important to get into some of the details of the case if people are going to get on their soapbox and make pronouncements about it, right? So in the year in question, 2017, Michael Cohen testified, and nobody discredited this testimony, and I actually expected the defense to try. He testified that he performed 10 hours of legal service for Donald Trump, which would come out to, because the checks were for $420,000, it was double the Stormy Daniels hush money than some other money that was owed to Cohen, and also some of which he later stole, but also a bonus. So it was $420,000, and that would come out to $42,000 an hour of legal services. And if, at the beginning of the trial, I didn't know that Cohen had only performed 10 hours of legal work for Trump in 2017. If there had been testimony that he performed 100 hours of legal work, I would have thought, reasonable doubt. Maybe he really was acting in a legal capacity for President Trump, rather than just having his money reimbursed. But that wasn't the evidence in the trial. So you have to go to the evidence before you denounce some kind of a verdict. Otherwise, you're just sliming the jurors. And these are, New Yorkers who convinced even the Trump lawyers during jury selection that they could be fair-minded. And they were fair-minded. They were very diligent in their analysis of the evidence, and they came to the conclusion that he was guilty.
Lynn Sweet, what do you think of this? So we've heard Jonathan lay out some of the evidence there and talk about how the jurors were, and yet most of the Republicans, there have been some counterpoints. Republican Congressman Mo Brooks of Alabama said it was at least time to replace Trump on the ballot. Former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, current Senate candidate, had a statement, urging all Americans to respect the verdict in the legal process. But those were the exceptions, not the rule. I mean, Lynn, you've seen Rod Blagojevich convicted, George Ryan, so many other people. Most politicians kind of come together and say, let's respect the legal system. What do you make of this departure we've seen in this?
Well, I'd like to say that in Illinois, and working for the Chicago Sun-Times, I cover political figures who are elected from their announcement to their indictment. And that has been the case through my decades of working in Illinois and Chicago. Right now we have, for our Illinois listeners, that we have had governors from, Republican George Ryan, Democrat Blagojevich, more recently Democrat Ed Burke, convicted of criminal corruption, former House Speaker Mike Madigan, standing trial. Nationally, we have Democrats, Senator Menendez in New Jersey, Representative Selyer in Texas, who's a Democrat. People, these divisions that investigate public corruption or white-collar crime exist, whether in local court or federal court. But I want to amplify what Jonathan is saying because he was in the courtroom. One of the hardest things I have to do when I talk to Republican officials in my reporting is to kind of be more tidy and disciplined. The trial was a sham. Okay, Mary, what part was the sham? What was it you're objecting to? We heard just now Trump saying I wasn't allowed to testify. Well, that's not true. Well, my election expert was not allowed to testify. Well, in criminal cases, sometimes you cannot be, if somebody doesn't have a witness who is deemed pertinent to the case, they can't testify.
Actually, let me just cut you off on that just for a second.
Yeah.
And I should say we have to take a break in about a minute, but go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, but I just wanted to quickly say, but before that witness, his name is Bradley Smith. He's a former chair of the Federal Election Commission. He was not prevented from testifying. There was just what's called a limiting instruction on what his testimony could contain, but he was welcome to testify. He was not barred from the courtroom, so that's not true either.
Okay.
They just didn't want to let him.
Thank you.
Yeah, there were certain things that he was not allowed to testify about.
Yes,
where he was
I see.
Ostensibly going to substitute his judgment for the judges.
Yeah, Go ahead, Lynn. We have about 30 seconds. Go ahead.
I'll quickly make the point. When you deal with professional journalists like the three of us, I was wrong, okay? And we say it. Jonathan corrected the record. I'm happy he did. That's how hard it is sometimes to tell an accurate story. And I misunderstood because I was not there every minute that his testimony was limited, not allowed. So that's why people, before you come to a conclusion, there is homework to be done, but it's very hard politically because when you explain, you lose.
Yeah, well, and here we are. We do try to keep with the facts, and thanks for that. We're going to continue with Jonathan Alter and Lynn Sweet talking about the reaction to the Trump verdict yesterday. We want to hear from you, 800-222-9455. Stay with us. This is the 21st show. We are talking about former President Donald Trump's conviction by a jury of his peers yesterday in what has often been called the hush money case, although if you look at the charges, that's really not what it was about. It was about fraudulent business records, falsifying business records for the purposes of furthering his own election chances back in 2016. We want to hear from you, 800-222-9455. A number of you texted us. Maddie in Champaign said, the verdict is a triumph. Trump has been a criminal for decades, and it's about time our legal system declared him as one. His supporters have never cared about his total disregard for the law before, so I don't think this will change anything. The fact that he can still run for office is absurd. We also heard from Julia in Kenny, Illinois, thrilled with the verdict, but disappointed his other trials will not occur until after the election. I would have never voted for Trump and believe most of the people who voted for him last time will still likely do so again. And Katie in Monmouth said, all I can say is thank God he's not made out of Teflon after all. I have no idea what it will do to his base. I'm sure they're in touch with, or she says, I'm not sure they're in touch with reality. They live in the same reality alternative facts come from. So I want to talk about that. And we're talking with Jonathan Alter, who has limited time with us this morning, MSNBC analyst and author of many books of presidential history. Also Lynn Sweet, Washington bureau chief of the Chicago Sun-Times, who also has limited time today. But Jonathan, I do want to ask you, Trump last night posted a video on his social media site. I'm not going to play it, but it's got this ominous music. He's walking toward the camera in slow-mo. This came out within an hour of the verdict. And it's an audio montage of him saying, this is the final battle. With you at my side, we will demolish the deep state. We will expel the warmongers from our government. We will drive out the globalists. We will cast out the communists, Marxists, and fascists. We will throw off the sick political class that hates our country. We will rout the fake news media. And we will liberate America from these villains once and for all. End quote. Jonathan, what do you make of that, and where is America heading this year?
Well, it's very dark. It's a very dark message. It's a very dystopic message, and it's a very undemocratic message. It's basically we are your avengers. It's in our hands to slay, metaphorically, your enemies on your behalf.
Well, metaphorically until January 6th, right?
Right, until January 6th,
Yeah.
right. I mean, and that's a good point, because they were willing to kill his vice president for not taking part in a coup d'etat. I think the problem that we all have is we get kind of numbed to this kind of rhetoric, and because it's not news anymore, because he's been using it so incessantly, we tend not to take it seriously, and we go on about our lives as if it's no big deal. We can go back to whatever our job is and our families. I think our country is calling us now in ways that maybe we don't fully understand. So my late father, who was lived in Chicago his entire life, he was at Purdue in 1941, and he was having a great time there in college, and Pearl Harbor was attacked. And he would have preferred to stay in college and just go about his business, but democracy was calling him. So he went to Europe, and he flew 31 combat missions in a B-24. He was shot down. Fortunately for me, I wouldn't be here, survived. And, we used to talk about this, that you don't get to choose when you protect your country from somebody who wants to destroy our democratic traditions, which this man does. And anybody who underestimates his determination to wreak vengeance on his enemies and to grab whatever power he can to stay in power and to continue to harm or even destroy our precious institutions. It's much easier to destroy institutions than it is to build them. And so right now what he's doing is he's trying to destroy the judiciary, which is the cornerstone, the jewel of our constitutional republic. And this is scary stuff that we're talking about here. And I think anybody who doesn't get that needs to, just look at the situation in a little bit fuller sense.
Jonathan Alter, I know you need to run, so thank you so much for taking the time to share your courtroom reporting with us today on the 21st Show. Very much appreciated.
Yeah, great to talk to you. Yeah, take care.
Lynn Sweet, I want to come back to you. As you have been watching the reaction from the Republican Party pour in and Trump's own, we heard that rhetoric from his video. What do you, what are you going to be watching for in the weeks and months ahead? I know the sentencing is scheduled for 4 days before Trump is scheduled to accept the Republican nomination in Milwaukee. What an extraordinary time.
Well, the first thing, I think the big date on the calendar is June 27th. Where you have the first debate between President Trump and former President Trump and President Biden. That's going to be in Atlanta, hosted by CNN. So I think the tactics, the strategy, whatever happens in that debate is incredibly important, because the President Biden will have to deal with it one way or the other. For the moment, the White House is not commenting on it. The Biden-Harris campaign did, but the president and people I contacted at the White House just say no comment. The White House counsel's office had an anodyne comment that justice, did its thing, and the verdict is the verdict, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing, but it was not much, which is the position they're in right now. The debate, however, won't let the topic of the Trump conviction go unaddressed one way or the other. If not asked about it, Biden, I can't imagine, wouldn't find a way to bring it up. So that's date number one. So I'm looking at that. I'm looking to see if any Republican of stature now says I endorse Trump and now I won't. I'm looking to see if there's any rank and file movement that comes up, where it's more than the Adam Kinzingers and Liz Cheneys of the world. But here's the thing to watch locally. House Speaker Mike Johnson will be in Illinois this weekend for a Lincoln Day dinner with the Tazewell County. It's a joint one. It's Tazewell and another county.
Yeah, Peoria area, exactly. Right.
Yes. So you'll have a sample locally as to what the top Republican in the nation is saying. Now we have a preview of it because Johnson put out a statement minutes after the verdict saying that the same MAGA talking point, that it basically the trial was rigged, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll be looking to see what that message is and how it's taken by Illinoisans. So it's going to be tough. I'm not expecting any change. I don't know yet what the messages will be for the persuadable Republicans, especially in the swing states. So there's a little learning curve here, analysis, data. And the Biden campaign has been ramping up its direct criticisms of Biden. Even knowing that the trial was winding down, they were upping their assault on Trump on some things that he had been using, his assault on abortion rights. There had been appeal to black voters in pointing out the racist comments in the past to President Trump. And they also started, when it comes to the area of birth control, pointing out that in their analysis that what Trump has been saying and his allies even threaten access to contraception, including condoms. And I wrote a column last night on this, and my thought is that the point is to win the swing states, and even though you may think, or some of our listeners may think, well, you're a felon now, how could you be president? We also have some data that these charges aren't taken as determinative by some voters, but maybe if you heighten the conversation to make it a discussion on condom access, that might work. But the thing about political campaigns that we know is that you can have multiple messages at the same time aimed at different audiences.
Lynn, I know we need to let you go in a few minutes, too. I want to see if we can work in at least one call before we do, though. And Mark is calling on line 4 from Aurora, Illinois. Mark, thanks for calling in.
Yes, I'm not a practicing psychologist, but the psychology major in my past tells me that Trump is narcissistic, and there are 2 examples of that. What would the rest of the world think of us, a superpower who wants to practice foreign policy, if a convicted criminal were to be elected to the White House? And secondly, an NPR commentator disturbed me when he pointed out truthfully that Trump doesn't seem to have cared about the impact that the disclosure of his sexual behavior would have on Melania. He only cared about the impact on his likelihood of being elected.
All right, and that's, I guess, the difference between this case and, say, the one from John Edwards a decade ago. Thanks for the call, Mark. Appreciate that. Lynn, do you want to react to anything Mark said there?
Well, we know that world leaders welcomed, when Biden was elected, a return to normalcy when it comes to relations with the United States, predictable, stable relations. Now, a lot has changed, especially in the relationship between the United States and Israel in the wake of Prime Minister Netanyahu's prosecution of the Israel-Hamas war. So I'm not saying things can't change, but world leaders, from everything that had been reported, will not look forward to a return of Trump, whether as a plain president or a president who's also a convicted felon, because he has no particular affinity for global institutions, especially NATO, and has been and has not been supportive of the war in Ukraine. So his return to follow up and to try and amplify or not analyze what your caller was talking about is that on several fronts, world leaders who routinely deal with the United States and already had 4 years of Trump will not look forward to another 4 except perhaps the authoritarian leaders in countries like Hungary Hungary, and the Turkey, Russia, China.
Lynn Sweet is Washington bureau chief at the Chicago Sun-Times. Thanks so much for making time with us today, Lynn. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
I want to turn now to two Illinois-based expert voices for the rest of our program today. And I should say the phone lines are still open, 800-222-9455. Megan Leonard is Associate Professor in the Department of Politics and Government at Illinois State University. And Karen Swenson is Professor in the Department of Political Science at Eastern Illinois University. Megan and Karen, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today as well.
Thanks for having us.
So I guess...
Yes. Happy to be here.
Megan, I'm just going to begin with you, sort of your top-line reaction to what happened yesterday and how you're thinking about this through the lens of political science and the law.
The thing that struck me the most is 12 regular, everyday people sitting on a jury were able to hold one of the most powerful people in the country, in the world, responsible for the crimes that they committed. Obviously, there's a lot more to this than that, but our jury system worked. And at a time where our democracy has had a lot of challenges, that to me was, okay, the system held, and 12 citizens did a really, really hard job, and they did it well. And that is a good thing that we can walk away from with everything else that happened yesterday.
It's such an interesting point. I myself had the responsibility of serving on a jury once here in Illinois. It was actually a murder case. And I got to say, I'm somebody who gets patriotic about voting every 2 years. But I will say, serving on the jury, it was so much weightier, and really thinking through the consequences of what decision we would make together would have on this one individual's life. It really is something different when you're actually in the room and experiencing it. Karen Swenson, a couple of minutes before we need to take another break on the show, but same question to you. Your sort of top line reaction, how you're thinking about this based on your areas of expertise.
Yeah, I'll certainly agree with what Megan said and what you said. But I think that the former president faces more serious legal issues in other places, including federal cases involving the January 6th insurrection and attempting to block the transfer of power to Joe Biden, as well as concerning the classified documents. And I think the classified documents that were found at his residence at Mar-a-Lago. And I think those will resonate with the voters more than this. And so we'll just have to see. I'm not sure the underlying legal issues will resonate too much with the voters concerning this case, especially not the ones that are already committed to support President Trump. So I'll be really interested in seeing what Judge Merchan does at the sentencing. He has a lot of discretion. He could sentence the president for up to 4 years for each count he was convicted of, or he could give him 0 prison time. And I do hope the judge will seriously consider the democracy issues on behalf of the former president. He is running for political office. He needs to be able to campaign actively.
Yeah, and that again is coming up in July. Let me share a couple of more comments we got from listeners. Some of them were very short and to the point. We had Abe and Mattoon just saying, lock him up, lock him up. I hope all those Second Amendment loving my flag right or wrong, or people are really pleased about their candidate for president being a felon, F-E-L-O-N, felon. Abe said. Linda in Athens said, no way I would ever vote for him or any of his supporters, convicted or not. And Kurt in Decatur said via Twitter, where you can find us at 21st Show, I'm ecstatic. He finally got some of the justice he deserved. You can join us. 800-222-9455 is the number. That's 800-222-9455. And we can get a little more into the weeds on the law and politics of this with our two guests for the rest of the program today. Give us a call. More to come after a short break. This is the 21st Show. Stay with us. This is the 21st show. I'm Brian Mackey. We are talking about the conviction yesterday of former President Donald Trump by a jury of his peers in a case in which he was accused, and again, I guess I should say is now convicted, of falsifying business records in furtherance of a scheme to help himself get elected back in 2016. We heard from people across Illinois about this, mostly people who were happy about the verdict. Joe in Carbondale said this verdict shows that no one, especially not a former president, above the law. A jury agreed to by both the prosecution and the defense found that the evidence was sufficient proof beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant had indeed committed the felonies he was accused of. However, Mr. Trump's followers will continue to believe that he is a victim rather than a perpetrator. Let's also listen to a voicemail we got.
Good morning. This is Joe from Havana, and I'm calling in regards to the Trump verdict. Trump is guilty. I think we all know that. But I know, unfortunately, we live in a country where the optics for people who support him say this is a rigged thing. But we all knew he would say it was rigged. And the problem is the Electoral College. The Electoral College can make Trump president, and the Electoral College has to be abolished.
We also heard from people who did not think this was a good result. John in Rockford said Donald Trump has been convicted in part because he tried to hide information about his past activities while running for elective office. If that is really a crime, then there have been many candidates who have committed it, and in some cases with the assistance of the news media. For example, he says, the cover-up of John F. Kennedy's long history of philandering by the press, which knew about it but chose not to inform the public. Why is Trump being singled out for prosecution? He says, this is a politically motivated abuse of the judicial process. It's an assault upon the hallowed principle of equal justice under the law. If this kind of malicious prosecution is allowed to stand, it is a threat to every law-abiding citizen in this country and to the rule of law itself. Thank you for that comment, John in Rockford, and everyone else who wrote in and shared your voicemails. And you can still call now, 800-222-9455. We are talking about this with Karen Swenson, a professor in political science at Eastern Illinois University, and Megan Leonard, a professor in the Department of Politics and Government at Illinois State University. And let me ask you about that. Talk about the idea that this is somehow unique, that Trump was singled out for prosecution here, and maybe you can start with that. Do you see this that way, or how do you see it?
No, I don't think that he was uniquely singled out. The way that our system works is there are multiple checks within the judicial system to ensure that prosecutors are not abusing their power. So the prosecutor here, Alan Bragg, had to bring the charges, but those charges have to be presented to a grand jury, who then says, okay, there's enough evidence to move forward. And then, right, they go to trial and they are presented to another jury who says, yes, right, they have been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. We have set up the checks within the system to ensure this exact thing, that people who are being prosecuted because, right, they have in fact committed the crime, or there is enough evidence for this. On the other hand, right, the irony of all of this is our system has been used in problematic ways to prosecute people based on characteristics of them, not political, but based on race, based on economic status. So we have never actually had a system that perfectly treats everybody fairly. But when you get into the system, it's designed to ensure that the prosecution itself is not political. So the irony here of those who have never criticized a system that treats people based on race, massively problematically, now criticizing it for this political stance is palpable, I would say.
Yeah, I heard somebody on the Bulwark, they did a live stream last night and just made the point along the lines you're saying, maybe in a little more pointed way, which is, the people who are saying this is a grave, this is the worst miscarriage of justice in American history is like, well, talk to any African American person, who came of age in Mississippi or Chicago, for that matter, or many other places in this country. Let me ask a question from a listener. Ann in Urbana said, "Glad he was convicted, but was he truly convicted by a jury of his peers?" Karen, can you talk about that and how, and if it needs to be more broadly, how juries are selected and what that really means in our system?
Sure. The Sixth Amendment to the Constitution gives a defendant a right to be tried in the location where the crime was committed. And that has been interpreted to mean that this would be a jury that consists of a fair cross-section of the community. And from what I could see from the selection process, which took several days, that is what happened. It was not possible to find jurors who were unaware of who former President Trump was. Something else the defendant is entitled to is an impartial jury of his or her peers. But these jurors were questioned extensively about their ability to be impartial. And I think the judge did a good job, and the prosecutor and defense counsel, as far as winnowing out people who could not do their job faithfully.
Let's go back to the phones. Robert is calling from Bloomington on line 4. Robert, thanks for calling in.
Yes, thanks for taking my call. I'm hoping out of this, the Biden administration will focus on the theme that I think people really want and need to hear, and that is that Joe Biden represents stability and progress in his private life, in his political career, in everything that he does, and that Donald Trump, in his private life, in his court battles, and in his business, represents chaos. I know some people are concerned about fascism and so on, and putting these kinds of labels on it, I don't think are going to help it, because some people are going to say, you're just afraid that he's going to wield power better than you and things like that. But this people are worried about losing their Social Security. They're worried about losing their Medicare. They're worried about all these things that the chaotic nature of the Trump administration will destroy, and there's a real potential for that. And I think if they focus on Biden's stability and progress against this chaos, Melania didn't go to the trial. Melania didn't show up. Donald and the other kid did. But stability and progress against Donald Trump's chaos that he's represented from the day he was born.
Robert, let me ask you, do you, I mean, you're in Central Illinois. You must have people in your life, or at least in your community, who are big Trump fans. And you hear that, well, there's chaos now. I'm paying more for eggs and butter, and gas prices keep going up. And, look at what's happening at these protests on campus. Do you hear that argument from people in your life? And how do you react to that when you do?
Yes, but only in my neighborhood. I think I mentioned I'm a history professor. I'm retiring. I just retired from a private school in
Congratulations,
Bloomington, Illinois. And a guy I talk to all the time when I walk my dog, he put up a sign this morning that says, Jesus is my savior, Donald Trump is my president. And, that's that Christian nationalism. And some people are going to, teaching history for 35 plus years, people see things through prisms and they refract the light. And Donald Trump is, telling them this is the light, and they're, all the other people are refracting it through their ideology and their prism, and there's no way you're going to get those people who are there. And I think the people who are on the margins know that, and they're worried about Trump but they're thinking, like you said, we have this chaos on college campuses. They're going to have to run ads to show that Biden's not responsible for that. Nobody, once you get involved in the Middle East, and something happens there, any president, it's been a difficult thing.
Yeah.
People are some of those people, the price of eggs, I mean, these kinds of things, you turn on CNBC, 60% of the American people believe that we're in a recession.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
well, I appreciate your call, Robert. Thank you so much. And I do want to make sure we have time for some other people as well. I will say, you mentioned the Middle East and how difficult that is for presidents. I hate to break it to you, but the president tweeted this morning that he's going to be giving a major address on the Middle East this afternoon. I guess, I don't know, focusing attention on that. Let's get another caller in. Tom in Rockford is calling on line 3. Tom, thanks for calling in.
Yeah, thank you very much for taking my call. I think what happens is we're in a tribal state when it comes to politics. And even though Republicans hate a nanny state, they surely love a daddy figure. And it doesn't matter whether daddy is abusive or daddy is an insurrectionist or even a criminal. He's still their daddy. And the MAGA crowd will defend him no matter what. I'm just hoping there's enough actual conservative Republicans still out there who will say this is just a bridge to not vote for a convicted felon. And I hope that's what turns the race.
All right, Tom, thank you for taking the time to call in and share your thoughts. Appreciate it. We only have about 3 minutes left in the program. Megan Leonard, what are you going to be watching for as this case proceeds through the legal system and as the campaign continues later this year?
As far as the legal system, certainly there will be an appeals process. One of the things that will be hard to communicate, but is important to understand, is that no appellate court can say that the verdict was incorrect. They're there to correct any errors in the law or any errors in the way that the trial moved. So any appellate process that might overturn a verdict would require the process to start over again. I don't know that would happen. Interestingly, Speaker Johnson this morning said that the Supreme Court should come and step in right now. Ultimately, even though this is a state case, the Supreme Court could take this case on appeal after it moves through the New York state system. So there's so many open legal questions. This case is not in any way resolved here. But really, right, I think what's most interesting is what it means politically. I think Karen is exactly right here that this is probably not the most gripping case. Most people probably aren't necessarily paying attention to the details. They hear about paying off an adult actress and they're thinking, right, this is just too much for me, right? Let's focus on what affects my day-to-day life when I'm making those decisions. But also people aren't paying attention to the presidential election right now. This is not an October surprise. We're in May. We have no idea what effect this is going to have. People might forget about it by the time November comes around. So politically, we really just don't know. Legally, there's a lot of open questions. Most importantly for me is how our institutions will hold. Will they uphold the verdict? Will the Supreme Court go out of its way to try to step in to protect Trump? There's so many open questions because we've never been in this position. And so to be able to predict things is quite difficult.
Megan Leonard is Associate Professor in the Department of Politics and Government at Illinois State University. Karen Swenson is Professor in the Department of Political Science at Eastern Illinois University. Thank you both so much for being with us today on the 21st Show. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks also to Lynn Sweet and Jonathan Alter, and to the many, many of you who called in, who sent us voicemails, who sent text messages. If you want to join our texting group, you can do that by sending the word TALK, T-A-L-K, to 217-803-0730. Again, the word TALK. Just send that to 217-803-0730. We love hearing from you about our programs, as well as your suggestions for future guests or stories. Email us. talk@21stshow.org is the address. You can find that address and every other way to contact us. Our voicemail line, social media, it's all on our website, 21stshow.org. We've got all of our past shows there, and you can find links there to subscribe to our podcasts, or just look us up on Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen. The 21st Show is produced by Christine Hatfield and Jose Zepeda. Our digital producer is Stephanie Mosqueda. Technical direction and engineering comes from Jason Croft and Steve Mork. Reginald Hardwick is our news director. The 21st Show is a production of Illinois Public Media. I'm Brian Mackey. Thanks for listening. We will talk with you again on Monday.